Good morning. First, I'm very happy to be here. It's extremely exciting to attend the JPAL Africa launch and to be with all of you. So I'm going to talk about a few studies by JPAL researchers. So the difference with the other researchers' presentation is that I was not a researcher on these studies, so I hope I will do justice to them. Rukmini has, I think, laid out the problem very well, so I don't need to go through this, but just to summarize what we're talking about now. While enrollment rates have increased a lot in the last decades, learning levels are remaining very low. And in fact, and Rukmini gave you some numbers, Stephen Adu will give you some more numbers from Ghana that basically are very worrying. Ironically, the increase in enrollment rates may be partly responsible for the low learning levels and the quality issue in schools. In fact, the enrollment rate increases means that the profile of students and the composition of classes has changed. There are many more students who don't have help at home because their parents are not educated, and this means that classes have many more varying levels within classes. So there are children who have difficulties and are not progressing, whether there are children that are doing well. And this is why the remedial concept is so key. JPAL has conducted several studies that look at the impact of improving general school quality by adding inputs. And these were a very important set of studies because a lot of interventions have consisted in providing additional inputs. So they've looked at the impact of providing free textbooks, of providing additional supplies like flip charts, of providing additional teaching materials, and of adding teachers. And what these studies show is that in the absence of other reforms or other changes in the school, additional inputs do not necessarily help the children if they have not achieved the basic skills. And to give the example of the free textbooks, what they found is that there were actually impacts of the textbooks, but only on the high achievers. And in fact, this is very logical. If you don't know how to read, how does the textbook help you? So if you have not achieved the basic skills, additional inputs might not help you. It doesn't mean that the additional inputs are not helpful for better students. So what is really important is to go beyond inputs and beyond improving general school quality and to look at inside the classroom. What's happening inside the classroom? How can we change teaching practices to adjust to the new profile of students? How can we change class organization? Now, in the last decade, looking at the worrying learning levels, there has been a growing belief that the involvement of beneficiaries in programs is extremely important because beneficiaries should have a stake in those programs. And this is true in the education sector and in other sectors as well. So there has been an increasing number of programs that try to involve the beneficiaries. So for example, in the field of education, parent-teacher associations have been created, school management committees, and those things. Now when we look closer at some of these initiatives, it doesn't always look that successful at first sight. So for example, in India, in the baseline survey that was conducted as part of the evaluation that Rukmini talked about, the researchers found that only 8% of villagers know about the village education committees, which is one of the flagship initiatives of the government of India to address education issues. And in fact, even some members of the village education committees didn't know that they were members sometimes. Something else that the survey found is that 42% of parents overestimated the level of their child. They thought that if they're in school, they're doing well. So this shows that the parents are not necessarily very involved in their child's education, or at least not to the point that they know what's going on. So, so far the evidence on how to encourage effective participation has been pretty mixed. So what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to talk to you about two sets of studies that look inside the classroom and outside the classroom as well. So what I mean by that is that these two sets of programs that we will go through are trying to change the actual class organization and teaching practices but also to go beyond the school and involve the parents and the communities in an innovative way. So the first set of programs is the one that Rukmini talked about. So I don't need to take you through them. So there was the Balsaki program, and then 2 generations of Read India program that Rukmini mentioned. So now I'm going to take you to the research design for these studies. So these were basically 3 different studies by a number of researchers, so I won't give you the names because there are many, but Esther Duflo and Abdul who are in the room were involved in those. So like the other studies that you heard about this morning, these were all randomized evaluations. And I think that you all understand why randomized evaluations are important and why we use this methodology, but I will take you through it a little bit. So basically the idea is that, if we wanted to evaluate the remedial education program, the Balsaki program, we could have come after the program had been conducted, we could have compared the students who participated in the remedial classes and the students who did not participate in the remedial classes. So obviously this would not be very instructive because the remedial students, by definition, were different from the non-remedial students. You don't want to do these comparisons. And similarly, you don't want to compare schools where Pratham decided to do the programs and schools where the program was not implemented, because maybe the schools that were most motivated were chosen, or maybe the schools that needed it the most, etc. So this is why we do randomized evaluation, is to ensure that the comparison that we are making compare oranges and oranges, to make sure that at the initial stage, the people who are going to be involved in the program are similar to the people who are not going to be involved in the program. So this is the design for the Balsaki study, the remedial education study. So first, a baseline survey was conducted in 122 schools in grade 3 and in grade 4. But I'm first going to take you through the grade 3 example. Then among those 122 schools, there was a randomization, so like a lottery. So 61 schools were randomly selected to be part of the treatment schools. So they were going to receive the remedial education program for grade 3. Then the intervention happens. During this time, nothing happened in the control schools. And a year later, and then 2 years later as well in this case, an online survey is conducted again in all schools. And basically the impact of the program is a comparison between the changes in the treatment schools and in the control schools. So it's very simple. And what they did is that they did the same thing for grade 4, but they switched the schools. So it means that there were some schools that received the program in grade 3, but not in grade 4, and other schools that received the program in grade 4, but not in grade 3. So this means that every school actually got something. In this case, it's not always like that. It was like that in this design. So now, there's a very large impact, and I'm going to take you briefly through the impacts of the 2 sets of studies. So the impact of the Balsaki program, in average, was 0.25 standard deviation. To give you another example, on average, a quarter more children passed a range of competency tests. So it was quite effective. Now look at the impact of programs. We are not only interested in the average impact on the entire class, we're also interested in the differential impact between different groups. So for example, in this case, this program targets the low-performing students. So we are particularly interested in the impact on the low-performing students. And in fact, when they do that, so the fact that they know the assignment rule to the remedial class and that they also know who participated in the remedial class or not among the low-performing allows the researchers to estimate the effect on the low-performing. And it was very high, from 0.6 to 1 standard deviation impact. To give you a more concrete example, it means that an effect of 1 standard deviation means that if you were ranked 16 at the bottom in your class, you would now be an average student in a comparison school. So 1 standard deviation is a very large impact compared to a lot of the evaluation of education intervention that have been done. Now the impacts of the Read India program. And these are the impacts for the first Read India evaluation that Rukmini talked about, because the results of the third one are still upcoming, but the evaluation is completed. So in the baseline, 45% of children could not read words, of children aged from 7 to 14. And 15% of children could not read anything at all. That was the baseline. So now some of the results, so just to basically show you that it was really very effective, this is the estimates of results on the children who actually participated in the classes. Because the way it worked here, as Rukmini mentioned, this was not conducted in schools. This program was conducted in communities, because there were other components of the program that were community-based and not school-based. So the survey was done among students in the communities, not children in the school. So they didn't know in advance who would be part of the program or not. But later on, they are able to estimate the effects of the program on the children who actually participated in those classes. And this is what's here. So for example, the number of children who went from being able to read nothing to being able to read letters. So with the Read India program, this number was then 50% in the end line, whether it was 35% in the non-program areas. This means that there was a 15% differences between the program villages and the non-program villages. For children who went reading only letters in the baseline to being able to read stories in the end line, this number was 37% in the Read India communities, but it was only 24% in the non-Read India communities. So this basically shows you that this program had a big impact on the children, in particular those children who were at a low initial learning level, which makes sense because this is the children that the program targeted. Now, what's also important with the kind of evaluation that we do is not only to evaluate a certain program, but also to understand why this program works. And one of the ways we do this is by trying to understand the impact of different components of the program. So a randomized design can be used not only to evaluate one intervention versus no intervention, it can also be used to evaluate intervention 1 to intervention 2 to intervention 3. So this is what the researchers did with the two sets of Read India evaluation. They actually compared different interventions that were all related to each other. So for example, the first Read India evaluation compared the program that had high impact that I talked about to only mobilizing the community through providing them information about the village education committees and information about the levels of learning of the students. And like Rukmini already mentioned, these interventions only, without adding the volunteers classes, didn't have any effect on learning levels. In the more recent evaluation, this program was compared to only providing materials. And they found that providing only materials didn't have any effect on learning levels. Now that doesn't mean that these components are not important, because these components were actually part of the intervention that had an impact. Right? So when you have volunteers and they teach remedial classes, they need materials. So it doesn't mean that you don't need materials. Right? But it just means that providing materials alone was not sufficient. Similarly, the volunteers classes that provide remedial classes, this program was part of a more general mobilization activity. Right? So it doesn't mean that mobilizing the community was not important, because this is how they selected the volunteers. Right? Alone, it didn't have much effect. Now I'm going to quickly talk about another study that was done in Kenya by Esther Duflo, Michael Kremer, and Pascaline Dupin, that is somewhat related to those findings. So the issues in Kenya are very similar. The program consisted in recruiting extra teachers and adding them in schools. These extra teachers, unlike the volunteers of Pratham, who are usually just secondary school graduates, the extra teachers in Kenya were actually unemployed trained teachers. So they had the same qualification, but they were paid contract wages. They were paid much less than regular teachers, and they were on contract, so they could be fired anytime. So just to show you the design quickly. First, the research questions here, there are several of them. So the first question is, does reducing class size help? When you add an extra teacher, effectively it reduces the class size. Second question was, does it work better when the class is split by initial achievement levels, as opposed to just randomly? And then another question was whether school management commitment can actually make the program more effective. So the way the study was done is that, again, a set of 210 schools was randomly divided into two sets of schools. Some schools received extra teachers and some did not. Then among the schools who received extra teachers, some schools were split by abilities, or in some schools classes were split by ability, and in some schools the classes were not split by ability but just randomly. Right? And among those schools, some of them were assigned to a program where the school management committees were trained to recruit and recruit the extra teachers and monitor them, and also given the ability to fire them. Now, for those who are going to attend the course, you are actually going to go through this research design in a lot of details. So I hope you paid attention. But in any case, it's actually much more complicated than what I just said. So it's a very exciting study from a methodological point of view. So anyway, what are the findings? There are lots of interesting findings of this study. First, overall, the extra teacher program was effective. However, just reducing the class size randomly was not effective for those students who were assigned to the regular teachers. So the effect of the contract teachers, in the other hand, was effective compared to those who were assigned to civil servant teachers and compared to those who were assigned in schools where there was no extra teacher. That being said, the result I want to focus on now is the result of dividing the class by initial achievement levels instead of doing it randomly. And what's very interesting, and because it relates to the previous study, is that dividing the class by initial achievement levels was more effective than dividing the class just randomly. So there was a difference of 0.14 standard deviation in test score between two groups. So this basically shows them that, again, relating to the previous studies, it's very interesting that students may benefit from more focused teachers' effort. So if you divide the class by achievement level, it means that the teachers can really focus on the level that the child is at. And that's probably what happened here, and as well as maybe more teachers' effort because those teachers were on contract, some of them. But the effect of dividing the class level also had effect on those students who were with the civil servant teachers. And it had effect on both those who were low performing and high performing as well. Now, the other finding that is very interesting here relating to this issue of how to involve the community in an effective way is that the program was more effective when the school management committees were tasked to monitor the extra teacher. And two reasons here, or at least two reasons. One is that when the program was not monitored by the school management committees, the regular teachers were less likely to come. And that sort of relates to what Rukmini was saying. When you get help, you may be less likely to provide effort. And the other thing is that the program effects were more likely to persist if the school management committees were involved, because they were more likely to actually continue the program afterwards. So anyway, there are a lot of interesting ideas in these studies, and I just want to share a few thoughts, again, like Rukmini did, about how do we actually take insights of our research studies to other contexts and other countries. Because like you've heard, this is really, our goal is to understand what works and what doesn't and translate it into other contexts. So a few things that are very important when doing this. Like Sarah mentioned this morning, the first thing that is really key is to understand cost effectiveness. Right? The program may be very effective but very expensive as well. So what matters is not only the impact, but also its cost compared to the cost and the impact of other programs. So for example, to achieve a similar goal, like increasing learning levels, how do programs compare to each other as far as cost is concerned? Or the other way around, for the same amount of dollars, what impacts can we achieve on learning outcomes with different programs? So now these programs that we've heard about were very cost effective. So to give you an example, for the Balsaki program, the extra improvement from having a Balsaki program in a school compared to the improvement that happened in non-Balsaki schools during the same times was a quarter more, 25% more. But compared to that, the cost of it was really a tiny fraction of the cost of an additional school year. So this program was really very cost effective, and the newer Read India program doesn't even pay the Balsaki. The Balsakis were paid a small stipend. The new program actually uses volunteers. So understanding cost effectiveness is very important. The other thing is that, like Rukmini said, the contexts are different. So one really needs to understand the context and anticipate the challenges that will take place. So a year ago, I went to Ghana and shared those insights with the Ghana Education Service. Now in Ghana, there is no such big NGO as Pratham. Maybe there is less of a volunteer culture, this is what we have. There is no unemployed trained teacher like in Kenya. Employing people is much more expensive. So there are many reasons why the Balsaki program may not work in Ghana. But maybe there are ways to actually adapt the programs that would use the insights. So what is very important is to really understand the insights behind the program, the underlying concepts that actually make a program effective. And this is why it is very important to understand why a program works. And like I was telling you, a way to do that is to actually analyze different components. Another way to do that is by doing a survey that really helps you understand the intermediate variables. I'll be very quick. So this basically means that the intervention may look quite different. So these are basically the summary of the key insights that we learned from this study. A, it is easy to teach students how to read in a pretty short amount of time. B, it's very key to focus instruction at the right level. And this can be done by taking the students who lag behind apart from the rest of the class, either during part of the day or the full day or during vacations. Low qualified individuals can actually be trained in a short time to teach students how to read and achieve the basic skills in math. Empowering local school communities to hire these community teachers and monitor them made the program much more effective. And a few insights about how to involve communities in the most effective way. One is that the most effective way seems to be encouraging direct action as opposed to just providing information. So direct action, for example, by having volunteers. Another effective way seems to be to give a very specific task to the school management committees. Not necessarily a broad training about what they have to do and the school resources and all that, but a very specific task. Monitor the extra teacher. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.